Hello and welcome back to the Guns on Pegs podcast. This is episode 4 of series 2. We're really rattling through them now. We're nearly halfway through this series. Now, Chris, we need to start this episode with a disclaimer, don't we?
We do. I suppose the disclaimer is that this episode was recorded at least 5 minutes before you press play, so the COVID rules would almost certainly have changed since. So I suppose if we talk about shooting, socializing, having friends, or breathing in public, that's because that for some people right now these things are allowed. But it may be that when you listen to this, all of that's banned. So anyway, that's that out of the way. On with the podcast.
Fantastic. So, Chris, we have a particularly special guest today.
We do. Very excited by this one. I was trying to write down how I'd describe our guest, but if you've clicked play, you probably all know who it is already. But I suppose he's my sort of my shining light, my leader, my captain, my example setter, and the person I try to emulate, my dad.
Yes. So, welcome, James.
James Horne. Welcome.
Good evening, chaps. How are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. It's great to have you with us.
It's great to be on it, and I'm waiting with a certain amount of bated breath as to what on earth you're going to ask me, because I guess I'm responsible for you guys for getting in the mess that you are at the moment and having the great time of running Guns on Pegs.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's you're where it all started, and I am one of the newer members of the team, so it's fascinating for me. And this is an episode that we've been talking about recording for quite some time now. And we'll get on to all of the detail a bit later on. But basically, we're going to talk about where Guns on Pegs came from. But before all that, there's some really important business to conduct.
Well, just before we go into that, I also thought I was just thinking a second ago that Dad's always been a keen listener of our podcast, and I think you listen to it when you mow the lawn and stuff like that. So you're now on it.
I know, and I've got an awful lot to live up to as well with some of the great guests that you've had beforehand. But I do love listening to it, and I've actually listened to some of them more than once because I've found them actually rather informative. So I'm very honoured to be asked by my dear son.
And you know what else? You know what else this means? It means that I can give Dad a pair of the podcast garters with a genuine reason, without actually just sort of giving them to him because I felt like he needed them because he's my dad.
Oh, yabba dabba doo, that's great.
Well, I think, in that case, without further ado, let's crack on. So first order of business, as always, is James. What's that you're drinking?
Well, this is achieving sort of cult status, this drinking on the podcast. And so I thought I would sit here with a chaser. So now that we live in the wonderful county of Kent, which is now Tier 4, which I've just seen a sign saying it's twinned with Wuhan, which we're not allowed out any longer. But I've got a bottle of Spitfire, which is Shepherd Neame. So that's from our county. So I'm very supportive of that. But I've also got something which has led me astray on many a shoot event, which is a rusty nail. So it's 50% Drambuie. And then the other part is a very fine whiskey, which is Balvenie Caribbean cask. And it's aged 14 years. And the combination of a little bit of Drambuie and whiskey is just wonderful. Then have a little sip with the Spitfire, and I'll be all over the place by the end of this podcast. So cheers!
Cheers!
Fantastic.
So you need to tell us where the drink comes from, because it's got a particular place, hasn't it?
Well, I've got several places where the rusty nail has come from, actually, because...
I mean, as in like stories where you've had it with your mates. I can think of one. That's what I'm asking.
Go on, and you let me on what you're thinking first. I'll tell you whether you're right.
I was thinking at the end of a day in muck.
You've got it. Out of the most wonderful pewter sort of in gallon hip flask, comes the rusty nail, and the Isle of Muck is probably one of the best places you could shoot ever. I'm lucky enough to have shot all over the world, and I must say, nothing ever beats a day on Isle of Muck with raspberry vodka gins, and of course the rusty nail, which when you're dealing with a 40-mile-an-hour wind and horizontal rain, it makes the shooting even more enjoyable. Uh, if those conditions can be enjoyable, but which they surely are. But the hospitality of Toby and Mary is unbelievable, and Rusty Nail is one of the many drinks that we've had there.
Sounds good.
I mean, I've got fond memories of Rusty Nails as well, because I think so. Back in the day, my dad was a member at a syndicate at Roke Manor in Hampshire with all of his fishing buddies, and Rusty Nails is what was served at Elevenses there. And I would have been about 13, 14 at the time, I think, and I've got very clear memories of having Rusty Nails there. And it was always bitterly cold and just the perfect drink for that weather. Just wonderful stuff. I don't think I've had any Rusty Nails for about 15 years though, so I might have to look into that again.
Well, you say you've got clear, good memories of it. My memory normally fails after 2 or 3 of these. So,
well, I suspect at that age I was probably only being given a just enough to wet the lips, probably.
So, George, if it's not a Rusty Nail, what have you got?
As you know, Chris, I've just come back from holiday in Slovakia, and the last time I was out there, I spotted on a beer pump, too late to buy any to bring home, a beer that immediately leapt out as me as perfect for a podcast recording. I've had some pronunciation guidance from my wife. It's called Zlatý Bajant, which means golden pheasant.
Oh, perfect.
And I thought that is just absolutely perfect. So it's a Czechoslovak beer, and it's pheasant themed. It's absolutely perfect. So ice cold, straight out of the fridge. Lovely.
The Czechs are pretty good at their beer as well. Is it good?
Yeah, it is. It's really nice, actually. Just a really nice, easy drinking lager. Not too gassy. Yeah, really nice stuff. Chris, I saw you just before we started recording on the video. You brought in what looked like about 6 bottles. So, what have you got?
I said on the last episode I made the mistake of not having enough lined up, so I've just gone for overkill this time. I have a beer, continuing my theme of beers, which is perfect for this themed episode of how it all started, because I have a Brewdog Dead Pony Club, which I absolutely love. I honestly think it's awesome. It's a sort of session IPA type beer. Now, the reason I've got Brewdog Dead Pony Club is that the Blue Posts pub, which is just down Arlington Street, just by the Ritz, just off St James's in the West End of London, when it got redone and reopened back in whenever that was, probably 2012 or something, soon after Brewdog was launched, they ended up having Dead Pony on tap. And our first office was on Jermyn Street, an amazing place to have an office. So we, as a team, always used to go and congregate in the Blue Posts just off St James's and drink. And Dead Pony was what I would order every time. So to have that on this episode, I thought was very apt.
Many fond memories and great decisions were made in the Blue Post, weren't there?
But I remember standing there, we were chatting about something to do with work, some particular idea we'd come up with, and Bruce Willis came and stood next to us. And I remember...
Oh, that's very appropriate. Die Hard is a Christmas movie, isn't it? So
it is.
There's a debate. Hey, is Die Hard a Christmas movie? We won't tackle that one now.
That's for a totally different podcast.
It came in the top 5 in the list this morning, I think, on the news. But hey,
right. It's not all fun and games, James. We've got important decisions to make. The next feature is, you mentioned that What's That You're Drinking is fast becoming an institution. Hopefully, Whose Bird Is It Anyway is also making its way towards that. It's the segment where our listeners send us their dilemmas and confessions and all that sort of thing, and we help them to decide what the right course of action is or was, or just condemn them outright, as may be the case. And this week's submission comes from somebody who we're calling Dave. And it's a real killer. This is a good one. So the email reads: after hearing your fantastic podcast episode today, brownie points instantly, I would like to share my story with you to see whether I've done the correct thing. Just before lockdown in November, I was invited to go shooting by a good friend of mine who I haven't seen in several years. Unfortunately, the day of the shoot happened to be my girlfriend's mum's birthday. We'd invited her to go to the pub for a nice lunch, of course, all paid for by me and my other half, as she's their only daughter and it was our birthday treat to her mum. Now, my girlfriend and I didn't live together. We live a good 20-minute drive from each other. So the night before, I phoned her and I told her that I wasn't feeling well. With COVID knocking around, I said, maybe I should stay at home tomorrow just to be on the safe side. So the next day, I packed up my shooting gear and headed off. In all honesty, it was a cracking day's shooting, probably the best I've had in a while. Afterwards, we headed to a local pub for a drink. However, unbeknownst to me, my girlfriend had changed the venue for her mother's lunch at the last minute. And sadly for me, that venue happened to be the same pub into which I walked with my shooting buddies. It's safe to say I'm now a single man. What do you think? Was I right to take the shooting, or was I a bit of an arse? I think I know the answer, but I'm curious to get your take.
Oh my goodness me.
Oh my God.
Well, Dave, I'm struggling to know what to say to you beyond the fact that shooting girlfriends, partners, wives have to be incredibly tolerant. And clearly the tolerance didn't last in your case, as you're now on your own. So on that basis, she probably wasn't the right person in the first place. So if you want along, and I think, well, yes, I won't relate to my own marital affairs, but yes, shooting wives have to be very tolerant. And
That's a brave thing to say. I hope Ali doesn't listen to this.
yes. Well, Dave, bad luck. I think good effort, good try, and walking into a pub fully clad in your shooting gear, I would have loved to have seen your girlfriend's mother's face as you stood there and had to explain yourself.
It would have a red hand mark all over it, wouldn't it? His face.
It would.
God.
I mean, this is ridiculously awkward, and I think actually in hindsight, they were never really going to end up staying together, were they? If this was his action quite early on in the relationship.
Yeah, I feel like he had made a decision about what was more important there.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. It's like he clearly decided that this didn't really matter, and so I think maybe he was the inevitable came out just a bit earlier than he probably expected.
Yes, I think the guy was running high risk early on in the relationship, and clearly it was not to work.
So have we got any advice for Dave?
I don't think I'd never really thought I'd be asked about relationship advice, but my advice is that if you like your other half, don't lie about the fact you're going shooting straight away. Like it's only going to end in tears.
Well, I must say, I mean, when you look at the shooting bill, that's probably the thing that generally causes more damage in relationships than anything else.
Yeah.
And the number of shoot bills that go to companies rather than to the family household is enormous, on the basis that concealing what you actually spend on shooting is in fact a pastime. And in fact, I've got the most wonderful original Bryn Parry called The Shooting Bill. And it pictures this very grand lady holding a bill in her hand. And she's looking at it. And the man, her husband, presumably, is standing there quivering along with his lovely yellow Labrador that's ears are down and it's looking as though it's the worst day that's ever happened, as he finally finds out. And funny enough, one of the really amusing things that when we first started Guns on Pegs was somebody actually wrote in asking for gift vouchers for a wife asking for gift vouchers for her husband and said, can I offer £50 for him to go shooting, as I'm sure he'll be delighted. And I suspect that she didn't realise that probably doesn't even cover the tip. So I must say the amount of information not understood by many of the shooting partners is extraordinary.
That's like the fisherman's prayer. You must know this one, James, which is, please God, don't let my wife sell my fishing rods for what I told her I paid for them.
I've seen the same thing as please God, when I die, don't let my wife sell the guns for what I told her I paid for them. Yeah, very similar, especially if it's a pair of Purdy's.
Right. In this 21st century we live in now, I think we have to condone Dave and his actions as careless, and encourage others not to do the same. I think.
Yeah, I think that's a shooting rookie error, that really, isn't it?
Yeah.
George, I haven't actually asked your input on this, so you must have some words of advice for Dave.
Well, yeah, don't do it again. I think. I mean, I can totally see where he was coming from. Not seen his buddies for ages. You know, we've all wanted to get out. We've all been desperate, and this year in particular, it's been that much more important. But I think in the long run, if the person's important to you, take them with you, or don't lie. As you said, I think that's the bottom line. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Dave. You know, it was probably a bit of an error, and yeah, you're now single and you can't go out for ages. So
Yeah.
you're kind of stuck with that decision.
Yeah, exactly. That's a tricky one, and I feel that I've also got another slightly moral dilemma here, because in theory he gets a pair of podcast garters for that submission, but I feel like this careless and naive action is going to earn him a reward, which is a contradiction in terms.
Let's look at it as compensation.
Oh, okay. I could probably
It's
settle with that.
a small silver lining to what must have been a tricky situation.
Fair
Just
shout.
to soften the blow a bit. But that's a very good point. So obviously Dave's got his garters coming, and everybody listening, if you've got a similar, hopefully not too similar story, do get in touch. Drop us an email at pod@gunsonpegs.com. And at this point, I just wanted to say we've had another piece of correspondence in the last couple of weeks, haven't we, Chris?
We've been inundated, deluged with an email. This email is from Forrest Richards. Short and sweet, and I really liked it, actually. I remember seeing it. Made me smile. It reads, I'm listening to your podcast whilst working at the top of a mast of a sailing boat floating in Chesapeake Bay, Maryland, USA. Keep up the good work. I loved it. I just thought, he's at the top of a mast in America. Brilliant. It's a lovely place to be listening to a podcast.
Wonderful. I love that. It's just so nice to know that people are all over the world doing all kinds of crazy. What was he doing at the top of the mast? I think we need more information, Forrest. We need to know what you were doing up there. Are you lookout boy?
I like this, actually. It saves us having to reply to the email. We discuss it on air, put the podcast out, and we haven't even replied to the email, and we get a reply. So, Forrest, could you give us a little bit more information? What are you doing at the top of the mast? Maybe, yeah. Is he lookout boy? Is he repairing? Is he working on it?
He may have been sent there by his wife for failing to tell her that he'd been shooting the previous day.
But also, he needs to get back in touch because he needs to send us his address so we can send him his garters. And obviously, the top of a mast, Chesapeake Bay, Maryland, USA, that's not going to work.
And even better, the garters are going to stick out like a sore thumb shooting some walked up roosters in the US, because the garters and the plus fours are not the traditional attire. So I'm going to love this. So we need a picture also of Forrest wearing his garters.
We should have got them in blaze orange.
Yeah, well, but then they would blend in. Yeah.
He could put them around his baseball hat and then wear them dangling down, a bit like an Australian might wear.
Right. I think it's time to get on to the reason you're with us, James. And the idea behind this podcast is just to give people a bit of an idea who may not know about where Guns on Pegs all came from. So I've been having a chat with Chris about it, and obviously I know a bit of the story from my time with Guns on Pegs so far. But Chris was telling me that it was 14 years ago this week that you came up with the name Guns on Pegs.
Really? That long ago? Time has flown. I mean, it has been brilliant fun. So, gosh, 14 years.
So naming things is a really interesting thing. And I write all the content for Guns on Pegs. And one of the most difficult parts of my job, I think, is headlines. And the name is of a similar ilk. It's got to be descriptive, but not too descriptive. So were there some reject names
Well, I'd better tell you the story, I suppose, really, because it was a combination of reasons that we ended up calling it Guns on Pegs. Firstly, I was not working particularly hard at the time because we had recently sold a business, and a bit like a lot of people, I decided to do an awful lot of shooting. And I found myself shooting at the most wonderful place called Chippenham Park, owned by the Crawleys, Eustace and Anne Crawley. And Eustace was a most amazing character who didn't mind what he said to anybody. And he had some extraordinary quotes, including, I remember one day when the team of guns turned up, paying team of guns turned up, not his guests. And he saw one chap as he looked down the game card and he said, "Didn't your father kill someone?" And I remember standing there thinking, gosh, that's a bit awkward. How are you going to deal with that question? But Eustace had a legendary status in the shooting world in East Anglia. And he sadly became very ill quite suddenly and running Chippenham Park. And he said, "James, you're not doing much. Would you mind helping me out on the shoot?" Which, of course, I was delighted to do at the time. So I started to realize that there was a demand for selling shooting, and we ought to use this new thing called the internet. However, I was also walking the dog one day, and I was rung up whilst I was walking the dog and invited shooting. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I can't go on that particular day because I was busy and I'd had a commitment. I was thinking, gosh, that's odd. There's no mechanism apart from waiting a month or so to put an ad in one of the shooting journals to promote short dated shooting opportunities. And so it was that combination that got me thinking is, well, why don't we create an internet platform? Because at that time, the internet was really, really new. And you've got to remember that Facebook started in 2004. It didn't get going until 2006 when it moved off campus. And here we are in 2007. So it really was at the start of the sort of development of social media. And anyway, I wandered back home and I was thinking to myself, well, at the time we'd already had the dot-com bubble. And I thought, well, why don't we register a name like lastminuteshooting.com or lateshooting.com? So as soon as I got home, I sat down and went on to one of those domain websites where you can buy the names. And I registered lateshooting.com and lastminuteshooting.com. And I thought very pleased with myself. But actually, it wasn't quite as clever as all that because I suddenly realized, well, not all shooting is last minute. In fact, very little of it is actually. At Chippenham Park, I was really, really lucky to have some really lovely guys who used to fly in from California, and they'd bought a house on the estate, and they were really some of the original founders of some of the great names that we know, such as eBay. And I said to Bruce Dunleavy, who runs Benchmark Capital, and in fact, even in his own name, he ended up owning 38% of Instagram when he sold it. So he did quite well, just to put it mildly.
Quite well.
Yeah.
And, anyway, and he was behind a lot of the other amazing names, including Google. And I said to him one day as we were standing in the field, why don't you lot start an eBay for shooting? Because there's got to be a need for it. And he looked at me, and he's a wonderful man. He really is a wonderful man. He's quite inspirational. And he used to bring some very famous people to Chippenham Park to shoot, famous American people to Chippenham Park. And he said, "James, we can't do it, but I'll tell you what, why don't you do it? And we'll give you a couple of words of advice." I think they only gave me 2 words of advice. And the 2 bits of advice they didn't give me was it was going to cost a couple of million quid of your own money to get it going. But anyway, be that as it may, I said, well, what a great idea. And I was up for a new scheme. So out of that, we suddenly realized that actually we need to be broader than lastminuteshooting.com or whatever. And I remember sitting down and with a dear friend and Chris, We were muttering about it over a cup of tea, not a Shepherd Neame or a Rusty Nail, but a cup of tea. Yeah, we weren't so boozy in those days, but that's shooting for you.
That was the winter of 2000. So that was this winter, 2006. Just come back from uni. We were sitting, as you say, sitting down at home having a cup of tea with Jeff, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And last minute shooting and late shooting, and we knew that they probably weren't quite right. And literally, it was one of those moments where you, out of nowhere, just said, "Guns on pegs," and I remember thinking, "Yeah, that'll do." And it was just it went quiet. It was quite funny.
It was an extraordinary moment.
Okay, so the seed has been planted at this point. At what point? What is it that pushed you over the edge from thinking there's an idea here to let's do it?
I think it was quite simply that I had a genuine need to sell some days, and we had we were putting down tens of thousands of partridges at the shoot, and we had only a finite number of guns, and it was obvious that we had surplus capacity, and I kind of figured that many other shoots must be in the same boat, and as I was doing an awful lot of shooting myself at the time, I asked fellow shoot owners all around East Anglia, do they have the same problem? And the answer was yes. So we sat back and we thought, right, well, clearly there's an opportunity here for a large number of shoots to create effectively a platform. And we had a look at a lot of platforms at the time. All were charging fairly large sums of money to be able to market your day. And you've got to remember how the internet has moved so fast. I mean, we look back at Victorian times at how engineering developed over that period, but the internet has moved much, much quicker in many ways than in the past. And we very quickly, with the comment from our friends at Benchmark Capital, realized that we needed to build what was effectively a disruptive model. And the disruptive shooting model was quite simply, we're not going to charge. And that way, there's no barrier to entry. And that way, it's going to cost me a blooming fortune. But nonetheless, I kind of thought, well, this is quite a good idea because at least it will work.
But Chris, I think that's a really interesting point. That is a really key point about the way Guns on Pegs operates. I think even today, a lot of people don't necessarily get, isn't it, Chris? That there is no upfront charge for anybody. Gun shoots all.
So 2007 to launch a freemium based internet business was seriously cutting edge. That's like wearing tight jeans. I mean, it literally was not the done thing. So at the time, no one could really understand. The whole question was, well, how do you make your money? How do you make your money? I was so pleased that everyone was concerned about how we made our money. It made sure that you got people on there, no barrier to entry. The key was that we had availability from all the different shoots, and whether it was a big shoot or a small shoot, and anyone could then take part in it. And it meant that you actually had a marketplace, because if you charged right at the front, in effect, you were a sporting agent, and we didn't want to be a sporting agent. We wanted to be something for everyone. So it was just very different, and people tried to pigeonhole us as well. And so actually, that was quite tricky with the sporting agents, because they immediately thought, oh no, this is a threat to what we do. And we were quite clear from the start. No, it's not. We're not trying to do what you do. If anything, you need to use Guns on Pegs to try and find new customers, which is what they now do. But it took many years to try and to get that across.
Yes, I mean, we were a bit like something the cat had just dragged in at one point with some of the shooting fraternity, because the idea of using the internet when traditionally you should only ever get invited to go shooting was completely awful. And I remember on many occasions people looking at me as though I was really rather undesirable, probably still do, but at the time it was like, oh, goodness me, you're changing the face of shooting. And, to be fair, an enormous number of shoots who I knew at the time had benefited from what we put together and have been extraordinarily grateful for, in some cases, keeping their shoot going. And this is one of the great sort of dichotomies one has, because, one of the things nobody knows, even to this day, is actually how many shoots are there in the UK. And we do need to know that. We believe that we know, I think, sort of around 9,700 shoots, which is an enormous amount. And yet, only a small number of quite vocal shoots often represent the body of shooting, when in fact there's actually a much larger body there. And indeed, one of the things that Guns on Pegs did was enable, for example, small syndicates. And I've never forgotten how, in the very early days, which kept us going because it was difficult when you were thinking, well, where on earth are we ever going to earn any money? But I remember one guy writing in and saying, I want to join a syndicate when I've moved down to Devon. I don't know anybody. And he put an ad up, and sure enough, he got a response from a shoot 3 miles from where he lived. And his letter back to us, or his email back to us, was just so lovely in the fact he was thanking us for what we've done. And that connectivity was really one of the most important things, I think, that we created. And that enabled people that had surplus capacity, or even creating a new shoot, could actually invite new guns. And I think that's one of the things that we've been really successful with. Obviously, for the blue ribbon shoots, they have a customer base which they'll always have, and we never ever intended to go after that type of business. The fact that we get a lot of it now is purely down to the fact that the guys have done a great job.
Well, James, you're preempting a lot of my questions. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you was about, the initial reception. And you've said that, maybe there were a few people who were uncertain or a bit sort of sniffy about it. But back then, I mean, even today, there are some shoot owners and some members who struggle a little bit with the tech side of things. Back then, it must have been like pushing water uphill.
It was magnificent. Chris and I have some great stories, and I'm sure we can regale one in a second. But
well, yeah, go on.
Well, before I do that, literally, we used to have to teach people how to turn their computer on and to go onto the site and so on and so forth. And I remember one day talking to a guy, and in the background, all I could hear was this quacking, as obviously he was in a menagerie of ducks. But it really brought home to me that we were dealing at that time with dial-up. I mean, who remembers dial-up now? But I mean, the creak and groan as it finally responded. But we really had to talk it through with how to get onto the site. But I remember one day, Chris and I, we were heading up north. We were living in Suffolk, and we were heading up north, and a shoot owner came on to us. A very famous person, actually, or quite very well-known person, came on to us saying, I want to set my shoot up on your system. And I remember I was driving, so Chris, you were sitting in the passenger seat there on I think we were on loudspeaker. Yeah, we must have been, because I heard it all. So we were on loudspeaker, and Chris sort of took over, and we were talking him through sort of creating his location, creating the narrative about the shoot, and then talking about the available days. And then we got to the great moment, Chris, where in order to sell your shooting and make it more visual, you have to upload a photograph. And what happened, Chris? Can you remember?
Well, you need to deliver it. I can remember it very well.
Well, I remember his lordship. So I'm giving it away who we were speaking to. Oh, I'm narrowing the market anyway. But his lordship, I remember he said, I'm afraid I simply can't do that. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask the butler to do that in the morning. And I've never forgotten it. It was one of the greatest moments in the development of Guns on Pegs. I really loved it.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. So that actually leads me on quite nicely to, you sort of alluded to it before a bit as well, but has the type of shoot that's listed on Guns on Pegs today, and Chris, you'll be able to answer this as well, the type of shoot that's listed on Guns on Pegs, has it changed over the years from the early days?
Hugely, actually. I think it's quite difficult to remember 14 years ago, but it was hugely different. We were nowhere near as connected as people as we are now. Just I think the whole our lives were totally different. And when all these shoots started to go onto Guns on Pegs, so it launched in June 2007, around the time of my birthday. I remember that. I was just finishing uni, and And I went to London, got my first job, and I would work away on Guns on Pegs stuff whilst I was at my job, and didn't tell them that was my first job in recruitment. I remember looking at the website on my screen at work and just flicking through, looking at all these names of shoots, and we'd never heard of so many of them. And we had 100 shoots on the website by Christmas, having set the website live in June. 100 shoots and 1,000 new members, free to use members who join the system. So it clearly got this traction. But I remember looking through these 100 shoots, and there were so many that we just didn't know of. And because people couldn't really travel around and go to all these different shoots that you just know about now, something like this was totally needed. Because I think you often used to shoot on like your syndicate, like Dad alludes to, your syndicate around your home and in your local counties, and occasionally you travel around different shoots. The idea of just getting in the car and going to Yorkshire, and then getting in the car and going to Devon, and then we'll do one day over in Wales, and then we'll come back and we'll do a couple at home, whatever, that just really wasn't the done thing back then. So it's changed enormously because people have added more and more shoots to their sort of calendar of stuff that they do. But really, the internet in general has helped to connect that, not just us, but we certainly instigated a lot of that.
Well, I think the most telling thing, Chris, along the lines of what you've just said, is having done years of surveys of our shoots and indeed guns, the thing that has always struck me and has always given me comfort in that we did the right thing was that the number of teams or number of guns that visit multiple shoots in a season has grown every year steadily over certainly a sort of 2009 through to sort of 15, 16. You saw almost one extra shoot per gun per season growth. And what we created was an opportunity to go to new places. And a frequent comment to a lot of people in shooting, and bearing in mind, this is now only 14 years ago, people were saying, I'd love to go to somewhere else. And people didn't know how to. So that sort of roving syndicate type concept has grown enormously over the years. And that ability to visit multiple locations, I never forget. I used to shoot at Chippenham Park a lot. But if you drew peg number X at the start of the day, you could work out where you're going to be, assuming you knew the drives, on all the drives going forward. And it got a bit, samey. I mean, shooting's all about having fun with your mates, but it's also, if you're standing in the same bit of land and you can see the birds funneling over number 2 gun because that's what's going to happen, it gets a bit boring. Yeah. So, to be able to spend it, shooting's very expensive. It's nice to be able to have that variation. And I think that's one of the things that we're so pleased to have created, really.
Yeah. So looking back those 14 years, do you feel like the business, could you see, and does the business as it is now, does it marry up with what you envisaged back then, or is it dramatically different? Go on, Chris.
It was not supposed to be what it is now. Can I just clarify something? I don't believe that we intended to do and get it to it. Could we just, that Dad's first comment? This was set up for a need. If it had solved the Chippenham Park break-even problem, which was the intention there, just to stop it hemorrhaging cash, then great, mission accomplished in a sense. And then also to be involved in a world that we really both love and have a lot of fun in, experience new shoots, meet new people. For us, this was a sort of labour of love for a long, long time. So I really do not believe that it intended to be what it was, especially like the type of call we had a team meeting this morning. But yeah.
One blooming great accident. I mean, let's not put any other words on it. It was a complete accident. And it's led to me taking my son out of the most wonderful job working for a bank where he could have earned a lot of money into working his backside off to sort of stand still at times. And I've ended up doing things that I never imagined I would ever end up doing as a result of this crazy idea over a cup of tea rather than a rusty nail and creating Guns on Pegs. And indeed, let's face it, it's been a very expensive development too. It's not been cheap. And I must say, when I handed over the reins to Chris, really, in 2014, we were we'd been burning cash for at least 7 or 8 years. He's turned it into a business which generates cash, which of course I'm rather relieved about, as he's now got to pay my pension. But it's been an extraordinary experience. But it was a complete accident, and I would make no bones to anybody about that. Somebody had to do it, and we just chose to.
So I must add something which I thought was particularly interesting here, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are sort of maybe sort of fathers in your position at the time, Dad, thinking about, I'd love to work with my son, stuff like that. That I imagine that's quite a common scenario, especially in our world. And as you say, it wasn't really supposed to be a business, and we were sort of umming and ahhing about, well, this thing's gaining traction. There's lots of people wanting to use it. Should we see what we can do with it? And we were sitting outside Franco's on Jermyn Street. And it was late one evening, just having a chat. And there was a guy sitting next to us in black tie who I think there was a big event going on at the BAFTA place. And we were chatting away about whether we should make this a business or not. And I was 24 at the time. And he turned around and just interrupted our conversation because he could hear that there was a bit of a dilemma going on, that could he add some value. And he said to us, "Look, how old are you?" And I was like, 24. And he said, "What have you got to lose?" And I was thinking, well, not a lot really. I'm 24, but and he was like, just give it a go, like see what happens. And we did, and I think he actually subconsciously was quite a lot of encouragement.
Oh, he was brilliant. Now, I don't know whether this is apocryphal now, because I maybe it's the rusty nail, but I mean, this guy was very famous. Who told us? We debated it long and hard. Chris has never agreed with us. I was sure it was Steven Spielberg, but anyway, I'm proving wrong. But anyway, let's call him Stephen. He turned around and he said to us, he said, "Well, look, why don't you give your son a go? I mean, 2 years, give it a go for 2 years. And if he completely screws up, you can still write him a great piece on his CV, and then he can move on to another piece of business." And funny enough, as Chris rightly says, it was a very, very important moment, as we just looked at each other and thought, well, why not? And off we went. And I was hugely relieved because, of course, the internet is not exactly an older generation sport at the best of times. And, of course, the development in the last 10 years has been unbelievable. So having youngsters in the business has been absolutely vitally important.
So my only lesson there is, if there's anyone else thinking about it, just give it a go and see what happens, because it's quite good fun. And then if you're 24 and it fails 2 years later, then just go and get a job, or try anyway. But yeah, that was the sort of logic behind it. Let's see what happens. So anyway, we look back and it's just been great fun.
Okay, so here we are, 14 years later. Obviously, I know some of the answer to this, quite a lot of the answer, but what's next for Guns on Pegs? It's been a continual evolution over 14 years. What are you prepared to give away?
So when we started, it was all about connecting shoots with guns. So people go on and send an inquiry to a shoot gets back to them, they're off, hunky-dory, we're happy. And we don't earn any money for that, and that's fine, but the whole business is based on advertising. So we then talked about connecting guns with shoots, but the other way around. So we created the peg match thing, which is really leveraging the data Dad referred to with the number of shoots. So people could find opportunities. So let's say they're shooting in Scotland and they would like to break up their journey and have another day on the way home. Lots of people find themselves in that position, as we see by email traffic. We created peg match. That's part of the premium membership. And that's been hugely successful in that side. The last stage we would really like to go down is to connect guns with guns, because it's the final piece of the jigsaw. And I think it really makes me think, when you ask about the history of Guns on Pegs and why and how we've got to where we got to and the type of shoot using it. If you think about, we solved a problem at the time for a shoot like Dad was running, a real need. That need has changed hugely in the last 14 years. Lots of shoots now have got quite big databases of people that come to have shot with them over the years. They've collected email addresses and they keep in touch with those people through various different means. So actually the need for what people do now is adjusting. And I think there is quite a lot of movement around sort of niche social media. People talking together in amongst their own small groups and community, not WhatsApp small, but slightly bigger than that, but just to do with your hobbies. I think we're seeing that through the rise of Facebook groups, which ironically was the biggest thing on Facebook when it started, and it then got small and is now coming back. But the reason I think Facebook groups is so big is because of the rise of niche social media. People don't post on their feeds like they used to. All the data points towards that. So anyway, guns to guns. We're going to do something there. I'm determined just because I'd like to. And even if it fails, who cares? Like, we'll have fun doing it. So that's the route I'd like to go
Well,
down.
I don't think, Chris, it will fail. I think one of the wonderful things that we've got is that we all know that it is the older generations who probably shoot more than the younger generations because they've got the time and they've also got the finance. And the great thing, of course, is that we've been around social media long enough, even for old duffers like me, to completely understand the likes of LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and so on and so forth. And I think the concept of niche social networks is really, really key. Everybody that shoots has got a group and circle of friends that love shooting, and it is remarkable the number of times we need to communicate with them quickly to offer opportunities or to get them together or get money out of them to pay for, and so on. So I think you're really on
Yeah.
something.
And I think actually, if you go back to the need of Guns on Pegs, and you think I've been on so many days where I've met really lovely people that were friends of someone who's invited me. So they're a friend of a friend, but you don't really know them well enough to sort of say, "Oh, give me your email address," or "Add me on Facebook," or "Let's connect on LinkedIn," or something like that. It's all a bit weird, and I just feel that there's potential friendships there, or people that I'd like to stay in contact with that I would definitely shoot with again. And then that's the start of sort of spending more time with other groups of circles of friends and just generally having more fun, which is actually the reason we do this all in the first place. And I actually think that there's friendships that have been lost through the fact that we don't have a facility to keep in touch with people that we may meet out in the field that's probably in a different way to what the current opportunities out there lend themselves towards. So that's sort of something that's actually bugging me more than anything. And I feel that there is something that we probably don't yet realize that we would like. And actually, if it was there, we might quite like to use it. So we'll do our best. I don't know. There's something along those lines will come next. That's for sure. Answering your question.
But yeah, I mean, George, I think one of the things that a lot of us can do is it's such a hassle to sometimes get 9 guns for a day. And if we can make the assembly of a team of guns a whole lot easier than it currently is, then I think that would be a great thing to achieve, and that would really round that circle of Guns on Pegs doing what it's done.
Yeah, indeed.
It does feel like a natural progression, and it does feel like it would be, as Chris said, the final piece in the jigsaw. And I know I'm really excited about it, and I hope everybody listening will be excited to learn about it as well. And it's going to be a while coming. These things do take time, but it's going to be a lot of fun and should, as you say, help friendships to develop and all that kind of thing. So that's a perfect way to round off that conversation, I think, and it's been really interesting. I've obviously heard some of the stories before, but not all of it. And anybody listening for the first time, I hope they'll have found that really interesting as well. Now, James, the final thing that we do before we round off the whole episode with all our guests, and I guess, Chris, since you're sort of technically a guest on this one as well, maybe you can answer this question as well. It's the final segment is desert island shooting. So the idea is you've got one day, unlimited budget, logistics not an issue. Where are you going shooting? Who are you going with? All that sort of stuff. James, you go first.
Absolutely dead easy answer. And I am really lucky. I've shot all over the world on some most amazing shoots. And there is only one place I would ever go back to for my last day shooting, and that's the Isle of Muck. Toby and Mary run the best shoot with the most wonderful shooting lodge, amazing food. You've got the sea in the background on every single drive. You've got some really quite testing shooting, from obviously pheasant and partridge right way through to some wonderful snipe shooting and woodcock. The Isle of Muck for me is where I'd quite happily be buried facing out to sea on Costa del Muck.
It's a good choice. It's a good choice. A lot of fun to be had up there. It's just such a tricky one without naming locations, because I actually think that that's not the most important part of all of this. But it obviously does lend itself to a great fun trip. I've had some awesome time with a couple of my best mates. So thinking, sat in the middle of a flooded field that turned into the most awesome duck flight. It was just about welly deep, so you could walk out to this slightly raised bit in the middle. And we sat on a little reed bed, my mate Pip and I. and a couple of others back to back shooting sitting down. And something like that would be absolutely awesome. Either with any of my best mates, then we just a bit of a duck flight, light partridge day, ending up in the pub for an awesome little session afterwards. And I think that's really the bit. It's the sort of the stories after going along into the evening. I hate it when we have to go home. So for me, that would be it.
Brilliant. I mean, yes, Chris, you're absolutely right. It's the social aspect of the day and having great fun with your mates, and nothing will ever beat that. And that is actually why we have done what we've done, because it is a social event. And that's the key to, I think, having great fun shooting.
Indeed.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's absolutely lovely. I think you've both summed it up perfectly. It's lovely. And it's been a really fascinating chat. James, thank you ever so much for joining us. Before we say goodbye to everybody, tell us a little bit about the next episode. Who have we got?
So we've got our high pheasant shot episode. We've got someone who's notorious for shooting a high pheasant or two, Gerwin Jones, on with us. So really looking forward to chatting about all things high pheasants.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And so, yeah, as I said already, and I'm sure, Chris, you'll reiterate this. James, thank you very much for joining us. Chris, thank you very much for sort of being a guest on your own podcast.
Bit weird, isn't it? But thank you, Dad.
Thank you, son. It's lovely to work with you again. Anybody think we don't talk, but no. Wonderful, George, and thank you very much. It's a great opportunity to tell the story, and it's lovely to join you.
Not at all. And so, as I've said, thanks ever so much to everyone for listening. I hope you've enjoyed learning a bit more about the origins and the history of Guns on Pegs. As per usual, before we go, there's one final reminder that you can get your hands on a pair of these very exclusive, money can't buy Guns on Pegs shooting sock garters. Send us your shooting dilemmas. Tell us where you're listening. Just get in touch. We just love getting correspondence from our listeners. Email us at pod@gunsonpegs.com. And if we read out your contributions, there'll be a pair of garters winging their way to you in the post. Until the next episode, thanks very much for listening and goodbye.